So back to the drain plug. I want to make sure that this is nice and tight before I do anything else. I'm not skipping steps. Every time I do an oil change, I'm doing the same process again and again so that it becomes habit. That's how you don't make mistakes, especially when you're trying to get faster and faster at this. When you're in a shop and they want you to perform and produce, you gotta have a process and steps that you go through every vehicle. So I've already tightened that. Like I was saying earlier, you have a little bit of leeway as far as making sure that this drain plug is tight when it's going into a steel pan. You don't want to over tighten it, but you don't have to worry too much about stripping it unless you're just giving it everything you got. But on aluminum pans, that aluminum's pretty soft. So when you've got a drain plug that's steel going into an aluminum pan, if you do over torque that, you're not stripping the drain plug, you're gonna end up stripping the pan. And then you'll end up having to do a pan repair or replacement because of that. So we don't wanna over torque drain plugs no matter what. You also want them to be tight enough they're not gonna vibrate loose. So snug and another quarter turn is usually what you need for them. That kind of goes for oil filters as well. So I've got my new oil filter here, my old one. This is still nice and clean, so I don't have to worry about that. I'm gonna actually mate these two together so that I've got oil on the gasket of the new oil filter. I did check my old oil filter to make sure the gasket from this filter is still in place and not stuck on the motor. And I'm gonna go ahead and put this on. Now, same thing goes for this, guys. You don't want to over tighten these. They are a real pain to come off sometimes. When you over tighten them, they're a real pain for the next guy that does the oil change. So again, you don't want it to leak, but you don't want to over tighten it either. So right now I've tightened it to the point where it's just touching the engine, okay? So now it's touching and starting to get a little bit tight. I'm gonna go about 3/4 of a turn after it touches. That's pretty good for me. I know there's other guys in the industry that say, might say a little bit more, a little bit less. About 3/4 of a turn after it meets is usually pretty good, but you get the sense as you start doing this, you'll get a sense of what's too tight, what's not tight enough. But that was perfect how I did it last time, because you were able to see with a little bit of effort, I was able to take it off by hand, not have to use an oil filter cup and a ratchet. Sometimes you do. So next step, what's my next step? Got oil dripping here, right? So certainly don't want to leave that for the customer. So I've got my rag, I come over, I'm not using brake clean on everything. Nobody likes you doing that in the industry, let me tell you, because brake clean costs money. So if you can get at it with a rag, wipe it down with a rag so that the customer doesn't see a drip on their driveway and accuse you of not doing something right, okay? Again, that kind of stuff goes a long way. They see a drip, they lose faith. So to make sure that you dot your I's, cross your T's, there's nothing gonna drip out of here. If there's little recesses or valleys that oil might have gotten into, use something like brake clean. The other thing you could do is, if you have to, you let the customer know, listen, as we drain the oil, it did go into, the frame rail, and you could have a drip, or two or whatever, but we double checked, everything's tight. You don't have to worry about anything. And if you have any doubts or anything, just come back and see us and we'll take care of it. But I cleaned it down as best I could. So make sure that they have faith in you, basically is the final say on that. So I've got my drain plug tight, my new oil filter on and tight. I'm gonna go ahead and check the air pressure on these tires, set it. I believe this vehicle I checked is 33 PSI, and so I'm gonna set them all at 33 PSI, drop the vehicle down, and finish this up. All right, guys, I've got a nice digital meter here. I'm gonna go ahead and check this air pressure. 27, so definitely need some here. Now, if you hear, the other thing about checking the air pressure, if you're checking your air pressure, whether you've got a little handheld that you bought for $2 at the parts store, or whether you've got a big digital one like this, when you put that, I don't know if you could hear that, but you can't get an accurate reading with it leaking. Okay, so if you can't get it to the point where it's like this without hearing that air come out, you might have to push some pressure on it and hold it to get a good reading, okay? Because you certainly won't get a good reading while that is leaking air out of that fitting. 33 on the dot. Had to put in my summer air. Still have my winter air in there. That's a joke for you guys. I never heard that. All right, guys. So we've got our oil here. Everything, like I said, has been topped off, tightened up. We've got the car down. Now I do go with, for this car, I've got 165,000 miles on it. I do go with a high mileage synthetic blend. You know what you get, there's a ton of videos out there about high mileage versus synthetic versus conventional versus everything. You know, what you really want to make sure, bottom line, is you have the right weight oil, okay? So SAE 5W30, first of all, that's what's supposed to be in this vehicle. That's what I'm putting in it. Aside from that, now what's actually in it and what it's made from is a whole nother story. So on this vehicle, I could have used all those three oils, synthetic, conventional, or synthetic blend. And in a synthetic blend, they also make a high mileage, which has additives within the oil to help lubricate, to help blow seals up a little bit. Older vehicle with a lot of miles on it. It helps prevent engine wear. It helps take care of any sludge that might be in the engine. Just a few things that they add to the oil that keep it from that kind of stuff from happening. So I do prefer it. It's a better quality oil than just a standard. I even prefer it over synthetic on a vehicle with high miles. Synthetic oil is a great oil, but it also has smaller molecules, and that leads to being able to leak more easily. So if you got an old car, you're worried about leaking oil. It's great if you've been using synthetic for a long time. Maybe you have an opinion, you didn't want to go away from that. That's fine. But with a car like this, I'm sure before I had it, they were doing normal conventional oil changes. So now I'm going to go with a high mileage because I want to get some life out of it. All right, guys. So I've got about 4 quarts in there right now. I believe this is going to take about 4 1/4. So I'm going to go ahead and put just a little bit more in there. I've done this one several times, and I'm pretty confident of that. What you should really do, though, regardless if you're doing oil changes on a different vehicle, especially if this is the first time on that vehicle, look up the capacity, the oil capacity with a filter. That'll make sure that you don't end up overfilling. Underfilling is easy to fix, right? So, you start it up, you let it run, you shut it back down, you check it. It's under full, okay, you top it off. If it's over full, and it's over full, more than just a little, well, now you got to go and you got to take the oil filter off. That might not be enough. You might end up having to put take the drain plug back out again. A little bit of a pain there, So definitely check the capacity before you go ahead and complete it. I'm going to go ahead now. I'm going to start it up, let the oil circulate about 30 seconds, shut it down, let it sit for a minute or two so the oil all drops back into the oil pan, and then get an accurate reading on my dipstick. All right, so before I start that up, I'm going to make sure that everything's clear of the motor. especially the pulleys and belts, even my fender cover here, and we'll go ahead and do that. All right, guys. So just to reiterate, when we talked about the oil, you know, really any oil that I put in here, if it's a 5W30, you could put conventional in here, you could put a synthetic blend, you could put a synthetic oil. Honestly, it has a lot to do with customer preference. You know, I mean, in this car, I want to keep it, obviously. Cost isn't really, you know, a big factor. But to me, it makes a whole lot better sense using a synthetic blend, high mileage, or a full synthetic, because you're gonna get more miles out of it. You know, typically what I do is I go 5,000 miles between oil changes with either a high mileage synthetic blend or a synthetic. Some people say I can go longer with synthetic. I don't like going longer than 5,000 miles anyway. If I was using conventional, I'm gonna go about 3,000 miles. That's personal preference. You know, depending on what the manufacturer suggests, that's what you should always go with. So go and grab the owner's manual or look it up on a reputable source online and see what their recommended mileage is. If you live in the Northeast like me, you're gonna pick the severe service mileage if they give you two different options, because, you know, we drive our vehicles in temperature extremes, in traffic, multiple state roads, highways, rural roads. That's going to be more of a severe service up here in the Northeast. So again, that's a little bit into the different types of oil. You know, there's a ton of videos out there with more information and plenty of opinions on that. So you can feel free to check up on that. So we're going to check this oil. I put 4 1/4 in this one. Probably a little bit more than 4 1/4. And we are in pretty good shape. Actually, just slightly over the top line there, which is fine because, like I said, this vehicle's high mileage, and it does burn a little bit of oil, so I don't mind being just a slight over the top. It's not going to cause any problem being just a tiny little bit over. So anyway, we're good to go. Now I'm going to go through my mental checklist, make sure that everything's good to go before I back this out. I've started it, so if I've had a major problem, I might see oil on the floor. I have checked that. My oil level's good. I've got my cap on and tight, so that's not going to fly oil all over the inside of the hood when we start the vehicle and drive out. Oil filter's tight, drain plug's tight. Now my last step is to, a last very important step for your customer is to reset any maintenance indicator light that they might have on in the dash. This one does have a maintenance indicator light on, and so we will have to go to Google and or YouTube or wherever, all data preferably, and find out what the reset procedure is on this one.